guys, welcome back to my channel. So, I've made videos on reading labels, how to avoid cross-contact, and even how to prepare for gluten-free travel. But today, we're tackling a different challenge. How do you prepare for the unpreparable? What do you do when, despite your best efforts, you're confronted with unsafe food situations? Most of my videos have a pretty positive spin on having celiac disease. I literally have this channel where we talk about living your best gluten-free life. But the reality is that even 8 years into my diagnosis, I still have days where it's really hard. Now, for any of you who are like, what do you mean prepare for the unpreparable? Can't you always be prepared? Let me walk you through one of the hardest situations I have been in since my celiac diagnosis, where I thought I was prepared, but I was not prepared. Then we'll chat about what I learned and 5 tips to help you prepare for the unpreparable when you're gluten-free. Story time. When I was finishing up my master's, I had to attend 2 week-long sessions where I had to stay in a hotel and all my meals would be provided. Naturally, I reached out ahead of time to let them know I had celiac disease and that I require gluten-free meals. I said, and I quote, "I will get severely ill if I even have a little bit of gluten, so please pass along that caution needs to be taken with my food." No problem, they said. They said that I would receive safe meals and that I wasn't the only one. I was the only one. On the first day, I arrived, I met my classmates, there were over 100 of them, and then we went in for our catered dinner. I stood in line, finally got to the front, and realized that nothing was marked gluten-free. No big deal, I'll ask the serving staff. When I asked them, none of them knew what gluten was or if it was in any of the dishes. So they told me to wait and they would get the chef to come out and talk to me. Great. I waited about 20 minutes off to the side while everyone else went through the line, got their food, started eating, and then finally the chef showed up. He walked me through the buffet, trying to figure out if there was anything safe for me to eat. Turns out, nothing had been made gluten-free. So he offered to make me a special meal, which is great. But by the time it was out, everyone else had finished eating. It was kind of like Lindsay Lohan in Mean Girls when it's her first day of school and she has like the little lunch tray and she goes in the bathroom stall and she eats it alone, except that mine was in public. That night after dinner, I sent an email. There must have just been some crossed wires. No problem. My biggest concern was whether I would have something to eat the next morning. The next morning, I didn't receive a response to my email yet, and surprise, surprise, it was a breakfast buffet with no gluten-free options. This time though, with the added bonus of no one around to answer my questions. So I had an apple. By lunchtime, I was ravenous, but thankfully we were in the school meal hall, which was actually pretty good. Allergens were labeled and staff were careful, but unfortunately we only ate here a couple of times. The majority of our meals were done by this other catering company. The only weird thing that happened in that school meal hall though was that there was always a little tray of desserts that had a gluten-free, what's this called? Flag? Sign. But one of the days there was a plate of cupcakes that didn't look gluten-free that had the sign next to it. And when I asked, it looks like somebody had just moved the gluten-free sign onto the plate of non-gluten-free cupcakes, which is kind of a nightmare, and I'm glad I didn't eat one. Whew. Later that day, I got a response to my email saying that there would be safe breakfast options and that I would have individually plated options for dinner. Yahoo! The only thing I found frustrating about this email is that it said, "I understand the guest is celiac versus gluten-free." First, I did make it very clear that I had celiac disease, so I don't know why that wasn't communicated. And second of all, this is the whole problem. Why are they treated differently? Gluten-free should be celiac-safe. You don't have nut-free food in the middle of a peanut charcuterie board. Just saying. The next morning, I woke up to the most beautiful sight. A dedicated gluten-free toaster on a separate gluten-free table with a little gluten-free sign. This was all thanks to 2 lovely women who were working there every morning. One of the ladies who worked there also would always bring out a tray of gluten-free muffins for me whenever she saw me come in for breakfast, because of course they couldn't just leave them on the table, otherwise all the non-gluten-free people would take them all, which is another issue entirely. So breakfast was solved. But no matter how many times I sent an email or talked to somebody about it, lunch and dinner continued to be a problem. To make matters worse, on some days we had a free lunch where we could go downtown and find a restaurant of our choosing. Now, I had already scoped out the celiac-safe restaurants in the area because I had prepared, but the group that I was with wanted to try this new place that I hadn't had a chance to look up. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, just go to your safe gluten-free spot. But I was in a new social situation. I wanted to make new friends. I didn't want to be the lonely person going to my own little gluten-free spot and being a recluse. I wanted to be social. So I said, okay, let's go check out this restaurant. My intention was to ask a couple of questions before committing to sitting down, but unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to. The group just walked in and sat down, and then I found out that they had nothing safe for me to eat at that restaurant. Not even a salad. So instead of trying to convince 10 people to get up and leave and find another place with me, I left. And quickly, because I knew I was about to cry. Can we just take a second to talk about how when you're trying to make friends and going to lunch with people, it's like the opposite of what you want, to like tearfully get up and leave. You don't want to leave, but you also don't want to cry. I went to a restaurant down the street that I knew had safe options, Copper Branch. Thank you, Copper Branch. And I called my then boyfriend, now husband, to cry into my bagel sandwich on FaceTime. Every other free lunch that we had, I just went to Copper Branch, usually by myself, but occasionally with one other person. By the end of the first week, I was having trouble focusing on my classes because I was so stressed about the meals. No matter how many times I asked about lunch and dinner, nothing really changed. A few months later, I returned for the second week-long in-person session. Now, this session was definitely better food-wise than the first one. The gluten-free breakfast table was still there, and the chef always had a separate dinner prepared for me. But the catered lunch was still a disaster. There seemed to be some sort of miscommunication that I only needed a separate plate set aside if there were no gluten-free buffet options. So, on the first day of lunch, I thought I was getting a separate plate set aside, as we discussed, so I took my time making it out to lunch. I strolled on out there, chatting away, and then I went up to the staff to ask where my special meal was, and there was none. They said, oh, we have a gluten-free pasta in the buffet today. So I looked at the line, which wrapped around the corner, and got in it. By the time I finally got up close to the buffet, I watched about 10 people ahead of me scoop regular gluten pasta onto their plate, and then scoop into the gluten-free pasta and touch it all in the gluten pasta on their plate and put the spoon back in the container. Now, if I watched that happen with the 10 people ahead of me, I can't imagine how many times that happened when there were over 100 people ahead of me. So I stepped out of the line, went back up to the serving staff, and explained the problem and asked if there was a new tray of gluten-free pasta that I could scoop from instead. They said no, only one had been prepared. And there was no chef on site to make me a special meal. So in the 20 minutes I had left on my lunch hour, I had to go run and find something safe to eat. The next day, they did prep a plate for me, and then they never did it again. Eventually, they just gave up and decided to give me an Uber Eats gift card so that I could just order my own lunch instead. Which honestly was kind of ideal because then I didn't have to sit in class worried about getting to the front of the line before the safe food had been contaminated. At the very end of this whole ordeal, I went and talked to the head honcho, the commander-in-chief, about my experience. Now, I knew that they had a student the year before me who had anaphylactic allergies to all of these things. I mean, he didn't die, so obviously they accommodated him. So I asked them what they did, and She said, oh, well, I think we just had separate plates prepared for him, which is what I had asked for from the beginning. It is so frustrating that they are willing and able to accommodate for someone with an anaphylactic allergy, but they're not for someone with celiac disease, which requires a safe gluten-free diet. And also because celiac disease is fairly common. If they have a class of 100 and some people every year, one of those people will have celiac disease, statistically. I think it all comes down to the fact that there was a trendy gluten-free diet that ruined it for all of us that need to eat gluten-free for medical reasons. And I do feel conflicted when I say ruined it because on the one hand, there are more options for people with gluten-free diets now because of the trend, but the problem is that most of the time, they're not actually safe for the people who really need the gluten-free food. Now, had I made this video right after it happened, this would have been probably a very angry video because I was mad. But since I waited to make the video, I've had a lot of time to reflect on what I've learned from this situation. And what I learned is that I do actually have some ways of coping with these unexpected situations that happen when you have celiac disease. So let me give you these nuggets of wisdom in hopes that they will help you deal with your unexpected gluten-free adventures. Tip number 1, find someone to ask. When I was faced with an unlabeled catered buffet, it was really tempting to just have a salad and take a risk on the dressing, but I'm glad I found someone to ask. While it sucked to stand off to the side for 20 minutes or frantically try to find someone at breakfast when I was already in a rush, it's better to know it's safe than to risk getting sick. Tossing my cookies in front of a room of people would definitely be more embarrassing than just standing to the side and waiting. Tip number 2, phone a friend. Maybe you're not an emotional wreck like me, but there have been some times that I have reverted back to my early celiac diagnosis days and had a couple breakdowns, like that lunchtime outing where I had to leave the restaurant. My recommendation is to have someone on speed dial that you can call when things suck. Maybe it's your partner, maybe it's your best friend, or maybe it's your parent. Just pull the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire and phone a friend. Thankfully, my husband was free, so I called him while I walked over to my celiac-safe restaurant, and we had lunch together over FaceTime. Without him, I would have felt so alone, and it would have been really hard for me to go back after lunch and pretend like nothing had happened. By the second time I went on this trip, I had friends that stuck by me when there were no safe options, which made things easier. When the catered lunch wasn't safe, we ditched it to grab sushi or order from Uber Eats. Side note, if you need to vent, you can always comment below. Tip number 3, treat yourself. Let's be real. Catered situations can sometimes feel like you're in a dessert desert. Tray after tray of baked goods that you can't touch. For the most part, there were no desserts for me on this trip, and if there were, they were those sad, pre-packaged dry brownies. What's a girl to do? Treat yourself! I went to the closest store and got myself a giant box of mini Toblerones. And yes, Toblerones are generally safe, though be sure to always check the label. I stashed them in my bag so that whenever there were no dessert options for me, I knew that I had something that was good. Chocolate is generally a good go-to because you can usually find something that is safe and it's so tasty.
What a dumb, excellent point.
What? And for anyone who's watching this that is thinking, just don't have dessert. It's not necessary. First of all, and second of all, no. Dessert is good. It's good. And not having it is awkward. Even if I was fine to not have my dessert, I was totally comfortable with it. I was like, yeah, I don't need dessert. You are still going to make it awkward. People are gonna ask you why you're not eating dessert. They're gonna feel guilty about them eating dessert while you're not eating dessert. They're gonna pity you for not being able to try the delicious cake. So just having your little Toblerone to have with your cup of coffee solves that problem. Another way to treat yourself? Take yourself out to dinner. When the schedule was more flexible, I took myself out on a little solo date to a place that I knew had great gluten-free options. I was craving carbs all week, and I knew that they had a great gluten-free pasta and chocolate cake, because dessert is good. P.S. This meal was at Milestones, and they even have those little allergy toothpicks that they stick in your food so that you know it was prepared safely. Thanks, Milestones. In some cases, you may have to wait until you return home to do something like this, but in that case, just give yourself a little mental IOU dinner date to your favorite gluten-free spot for when you return home. That way you have something to look forward to. Tip number 4, pack or find snacks. I feel like most people who are gluten-free already do this, but after my experiences on these trips, it was a great reminder to always have snacks on hand. In this scenario, I was so sure that I was gonna have safe food that I didn't bring anything. Rookie mistake, Robin. Rookie mistake. You should always have at least a protein bar or a granola bar. Something small you can just put in your bag, put in your pocket. Even if you've been told that you'll be given a gluten-free meal, you never know when there's gonna be a miscommunication or something gets accidentally cross-contaminated. If you didn't pack your snacks ahead of time, like me, see if you can find a local corner store or a grocery store. Even if they don't have the best gluten-free selection, at least you'll have something. If there is a safe gluten-free option that is easy for you to wrap in a napkin and put into your purse, I recommend doing that. I may have stashed quite a few of those gluten-free muffins that I was given at breakfast. Some may call me cheap, but I like to think I'm resourceful. Tip number 5, make it right. When you get stuck in these situations, it's so important to speak up and make it right. Not only will it benefit you, but it will also benefit other gluten-free folks. It's so easy to stay silent, but you'd be surprised how many people genuinely want to help. Exhibit A, they bought a dedicated toaster for me and set up a separate gluten-free table overnight. And now they have a dedicated toaster for any celiac or gluten-free people that eat there in the future. It's like Domino's. I spoke up, they made it right, and now all the gluten-free people get to use it in the future. Bingo, bango, bongo. Also, I was the only celiac person on this trip, but I wasn't the only gluten-free person on this trip. So once people saw that I was getting a special meal prepared for me, those people also felt like they could ask for the special meal, because up to that point, they were barely eating dinner because they just didn't see that there were gluten-free options. So me speaking up meant that other people got to eat as well. It's my hope that even though I had a rough time on these trips, if there's a celiac person that attends next year, it will be easier for them. At the very least, my speaking up has brought another dedicated gluten-free toaster into this world. So that's what I try to do when I'm stuck without gluten-free options. Though I do just want to reiterate that it is really hard to keep your cool when this is actually happening. The best thing that you can do is be prepared, and the next best thing is to prepare for the unpreparable. Have you ever been in a situation like this? How did you deal with it? Let me know in the comments below. I also just want to take a quick moment to say thank you for 10,000 subscribers. I'm so excited. To celebrate this 10,000 milestone, I want to do a little Q&A video. If you have a question you want to ask me, please leave it in the comments below. Just keep in mind, I'm not a medical professional and I'm not qualified to give medical advice, so save that for your doctor. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Are you poking my face? I can't lift it!
You gotta support it.
It's so heavy. Okay, I'm gonna use my back.
So when you pull it out, it's gotta stay up.
Okay. It's heavy. What are you laughing at?